the principle here is what leaders do in moderation, followers will do in excess. So if you, as a spiritual leader like Mark Driscoll, have some kind of snide remark about Latter-day Saints calling the Book of Mormon toilet paper, your followers are going to take that into excess, and they're going to run with it to places that you never intended it to go. And so this is something that I live by. It's something that anyone that I oversee in ministry is a principle that I try to instill in them.
Hello, my friends. My name is Ben Piccini. I am the Civility Guy, and welcome to Radical Civility. You can tell it's a Sunday because I'm in my church clothes. I am bringing back the podcast, and I finished my dissertation, and I'm still raising 4 kids, so I don't have a ton of time, and it won't always be perfect, but I feel like now is a good time to speak up and say important things as kindly and as civilly as I can. I wanted to let you know about a couple of things about the podcast right now. Number one, I am experimenting. I am trying to find ways to do low-cost, really low production value videos that are still meaningful and make a difference. So you're going to see me trying a lot of new things. The other day I tried actually really successfully. I made a little YouTube video that got no views on Instagram or on anything else, but on YouTube it got like 15,000. And there was a lot of really good discussion, and it was exactly what I'm trying to do with, like, let's just say good things and put them out into the world. So I'm trying some new content, I'm trying new ideas, and just know that it'll probably be that way for the next little while. Number two, where can you follow all of this? The first thing I would say is YouTube is the best place. That's where you're going to be able to find the content that I've been making so far. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm starting to put more short stuff together. I think that that's actually been really successful, and it's been really fun. So I've got something on Instagram. I always use Facebook. That's actually where I share more of my memes and that kind of a thing. And a little bit on Twitter, not as much, but a little bit. And I might start looking at LinkedIn and other places, but like I just feel like LinkedIn is weird. So maybe I'll avoid that for right now. How can you support the podcast? A couple of things. So number one, you can just go out and try to be as civil as you can. Make the world better, right? Like eat your vegetables and be a good person. Number two, you can comment on posts. So commenting is actually in some ways more important than liking, especially if you're doing it deliberately and making a comment that's meaningful. If you're pointing out something that other people aren't seeing. The next one is obviously liking, sharing, subscribing. All of those are always helpful. I do have a Patreon. If I get money from that, I'm probably going to put it toward an engineer. I'm going to find a poor, starving college student to try and help me engineer some more videos and stuff like that. And so that is always welcome. But the biggest thing is honestly just to go out and try to be as good a person as you can be. To try to make the world a better place. My wife brought home a little poster at one point, and we have a few of these. We try to keep it minimal because too many of these can feel a little bit on the cringe side. In fact, one that's very common is it says blessed, and we saw one up that said belst, and we laughed ourselves silly. It was in a meme cache that had like 15 misspelled. They were meant to be really sweet and adorable, and we saw belst, and we laughed so hard that she bought me a copy for my office. And so now at my office, you can see belst because it's kind of it's very representative of the self-deprecating, like, I want to say inspirational things, but I also don't want to be cringe. And so anyway, this one is a little bit more serious. It says, believe there is good in the world. And then she highlighted, be the good in the world. And I think that's a pretty good motto for what I'm trying to encourage people to do. And so if you find something that I have done that is useful, please, by all means, pass it along. But the goal is just be the best person you can be. One other note, I am going to aim for like one high quality production video or podcast or interview about a month. I'm going to say it's occasionally you're going to have something that's a little bit more long form. And in the interim, you're going to get some short form stuff. And I'm actually really excited to share with you today's. Kyle Beshears is a friend of mine. So after the Michigan shooting and fire, the case of arson in Michigan, I saw a lot of takes online. There was a lot of pain in my faith community, and I was looking for good takes. Well, Kyle Beshears had a really good take. He wrote an essay, actually wrote 2, that were on the topic of evangelicals and Mormonism and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I found his work to be really compelling and thoughtful, and so I wanted to pass it along to all of you. And so we have this great interview, and you'll be able to watch it in just 1 minute. Oh, I remembered. There was one other thing that I wanted to say if you want to help the podcast, and that is to give feedback. Send cool ideas. If you see an article that's incivility or memes that are really funny, or if you have feedback on my sound quality and you just want to complain, that is great. All of those things are wonderful. They help me make a better podcast, and I'm not going to be upset about them. And if you're in the comments and people are saying dumb stuff, call them out. Do it nicely, but be like, hey, I don't think you know how this works. I hate comment sections. I think they're kind of the worst, but they drive a ton of engagement. And I don't actually want to get rid of them. I just want people to be their best selves. And the best way to do that isn't for me to police. It's for everybody to say, hey, if there's a comment section for a civility page, you should anticipate that we're going to be like a little bit on the civility side. And so, yeah, we're going to try to avoid tone policing, but there is going to be a little bit of like, hey, be decent to each other, right? Like be chill and don't take yourselves too seriously and have some fun while you're at it. With that, why don't we get to my interview with Kyle Beshears? He's a pastor. I think you are going to have a great time. I would love to hear what you think of the article. So comment on it, like I said earlier, and we will talk to you soon. All right, welcome, Kyle. It's great to have you. Why don't we actually start with, I don't actually know how we came to be friends with each other, but why don't you introduce yourself real quick for the audience and tell us a little bit about how we connected and what it was about?
Sure. My name is Kyle Beshears. I am a pastor in Mobile, Alabama, and I have a great interest in the history and faith and practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I did my PhD dissertation at Southern Seminary in Louisville on LDS history, and in specific, the James Strang sect of that story. It's a fascinating one for me, and so that's kind of what I've specialized in as a historian. I've presented and published on that topic. I'm a board member on the John Whitmer Historical Association, which is one of the scholarly communities in that area. And I've been really involved in interfaith dialogue with Latter-day Saints for just over a decade now. The church where I pastor, we take university students once a year on our spring break out to Utah. And then we partner with institutes up and down the valley, and we have good conversations with folks. And then our students also get to visit evangelical churches in Utah, because there it's reverse, right? The evangelicals are the minority and Latter-day Saints are the majority. And so we get to spend time with them and learn from them and encourage them. How we became friends, I don't know. I'm suspecting it's because you and I have a lot of people that our circles are really tight and we know a lot of the same people. And so I'm gonna chalk it up to both providence and the Facebook friendship request algorithm.
I have to say, when you come out to Utah, just know that if you've ever wanted Utah, but even more desert and even colder, just know that Rexburg is always waiting for you.
Yeah, that's on the list. I haven't been to Rexburg yet, and I'd like to go there. Yeah.
You would get your very own welcome and tour, and we'd roll out the very cold frosted red carpet for you. That's great. I was telling you before we started recording, I think if I do nothing with my life except repeat other people's good takes and amplify them, that will be a life well spent. And after Charlie Kirk and then after the Michigan shooting, I was doing a lot of thinking and I was looking for good takes. And you had a really good one. So you've written 2 articles in the last couple of weeks. And I kind of want to start just by telling people, please go and read Kyle Beshears' Substack, which I think is kylebeshears.substack.com or something pretty close to. I mean, it's a very straightforward address. But there are 2 articles, and I found both of them really interesting and really useful. The first one is Weep with Those Who Weep. And so if you'd be willing, why don't you just kind of summarize that article and what you were trying to communicate with that article? And then I'll have a couple of questions, and then we can go on to the second one.
Yeah, that article was birthed out of a response that I was seeing from some fellow evangelicals, not all of them. I think the majority of evangelicals saw what happened in specific at Grand Blanc, Michigan, as a tragedy, and sympathized and empathized with not only the families there in the community, but also Latter-day Saints in general. But there was a sufficient number of people in evangelicalism that felt it was necessary at that precise moment to inform Latter-day Saints why they're not Christian, or to kind of like boundary maintenance is probably the kinder way to say things. And that frustrated me a little bit, because we have a clear biblical precedent that we would both share in our faith communities of weeping with those who weep, uh, nearly without qualification. Like it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with them theologically at this point. There's been a tragedy in their community, 4 deaths, and this is not the time to bring up theological disagreements. There is a time for that, of course there is, but prior to the funerals even having occurred is an inappropriate time. So I began to formulate probably the beta version of that essay, and it kind of amplified when a particularly bellicose pastor in our movement named Mark Driscoll, who has been known in the past for expressing some anti-Mormon sentiment, and I that word can be tossed around, I think, a lot, from anything from proper anti-Mormonism, as in like I don't know, Lillian Boggs' extermination order from Missouri, to, oh, that evangelical says that they don't believe the Book of Mormon is scripture, right? That it runs a pretty wide range. But what I was seeing from Driscoll was proper anti-Mormonism, likening the Book of Mormon to toilet paper, dismissing the entire Latter-day Saint Church as a demonic cult with little demons on top of the temples, meaning Moroni. And all of this during the time, not only when you had the massacre occurring, but also Russell M. Nelson's death as well. So for me, my call with the essay was two fellow evangelical, specifically leaders who engage in that kind of rhetoric, knowing full well that Latter-day Saints are reading over my shoulder. So I kind of had two goals here. One was to call those leaders to reflect on their rhetoric, to tone it down, and to even ask if kind of what they're engaging in is biblical to begin with, which I don't think it is. And then second, to communicate to Latter-day Saints as best I can that not all of us think that this kind of thing is okay. Uh, with the knowledge that Latter-day Saints have in their history they're keenly attuned to what that kind of rhetoric can lead to, and it needs to stop. And that was kind of the first essay. I got some good feedback from that, a lot of positive feedback from a lot of people, but I also had calls for clarity from evangelicals, like, well, what constitutes anti-Mormonism? Am I engaging in anti-Mormonism if I say I disagree? Or like, how do I have a conversation with a Latter-day Saint without being accused of being anti-Mormon? And so the second article was kind of my observations and how evangelicals engage with Latter-day Saints. And I said there's kind of like three modes. Like you have the polemic, which is the kind of really can be really intense but very clear engagement, say a
It's almost like
conversation,
debate culture, right? This is where
almost
it's
like
like
debate. Mhm.
we're gonna go in, we're gonna go hard, we're gonna get to the meaningful stuff, but we're gonna be pretty hard hitting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So there's the polemic side of it, and the risk for polemics is you kind of go into anti-Mormonism. On the other end of it was what I call bridge building. So this is where we're really not going to talk about our differences. We're going to maximize what we agree and we affirm. We're going to build friendships. We're going to lower the tension as much as possible so that we can just know and be known with each other, and not to other each other, not to demonize each other. And I think there's great value in that, but I also think there's a trade-off there because the lower the tension, sometimes we just kind of throw clarity out the window altogether for the sake of a synthetic or an inauthentic piece. And I call that syncretism, where we're saying like, well, there's no differences between us at all. Well, of course there are. Of course there are differences, right? So I try to stay in the middle in what I call an ambassadorial mode, where people that engage in this are not official, but de facto representatives of their side or their faith tradition, and they're willing to discuss differences, but they do so in clarity with charity. So there's mutual respect. Hopefully, there's friendship because I think friendship is actually the most fertile soil in which interfaith dialogue can grow. And it's willing to back away if tension is rising when we're talking about differences, but it's not willing to just stay around in the agreements, if that makes sense. So that was kind of the summaries of both of those essays. And I think particularly at this point in time in our nation's history, these kinds of calls are really, really important because I feel as like a culture, we're losing the ability to talk with people that we disagree with. Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. So I teach a fun psychology class, And I love bringing this up to my students. I said, Jim Mad Dog Mattis is not exactly a hippie. And I lead them through some of his more, explosive quotes that are pretty gobsmacking, right? When there's a Politico article that has like 9 famous quotes by Mad Dog Mattis, just to make sure they really understand what kind of guy he is. And then he writes his book and he says, I think the number one enemy right now to America is tribalism. And,
Yeah.
and my hope is to kind of knock them off their feet a little bit intellectually to say this tribe stuff is deep within us, right? It's just like so many other appetites, if you want to think of it that way, where it can be really useful and it can also be incredibly dangerous and it's getting out
Mhm.
of hand. And Jim Mad Dog Mattis thinks that, but so does Leon Panetta, his Obama appointed successor, right? Or I can't remember what the order was. And we have great conversations about that and how do we tackle it and all of those things. You said in your first article, I wanted to just give a couple of things that I really enjoyed. So one of them is just the term boundary maintenance and this question
Mhm.
of is it the right time? I made a video right around this time, and I was feeling some pretty heated feelings toward Mark Driscoll. And I think part of why I really appreciated your take was because it helped me to calm down a little bit, to recognize, and I said this in my video, I said, the vast majority of voices of evangelicals, of my Christian friends, my Catholic friends, has been clear and very, very direct on this, that they are just heartbroken with us. And I think that was something that I said because that's actually what I was seeing, right, from my friends. And Mark Driscoll was being an idiot, and that's his prerogative. He can do that.
Mm.
But I think a lot of Latter-day Saints needed to hear in that moment that that is the exception that is going to get retweeted and outrage baited out throughout the world,
Mm.
and it's going to carry the message. But that's not how most people act. I want to come back to that a little bit later because I have a question about it. But the second one that you mentioned that I really liked was what leaders do in moderation, followers do in excess. Do you want to just
Mhm.
kind of explain that in your own words really quick? Because I thought that was such a lovely way to explain it.
Yeah, this is one of the core spiritual leadership principles that I try to live by, and I don't do it perfectly. But the idea behind it is leaders, especially in spiritual spaces, if you're a bishop in in your ward or a pastor in a church, you have the added responsibility of moderating yourself before your people and modeling what true and Christ-like behavior is supposed to be. So whenever it comes to a vice, let's say, or something that maybe you were even at liberty to do, but wisdom dictates where, when, and how often. The principle here is what leaders do in moderation, followers will do in excess. So if you, as a spiritual leader like Mark Driscoll, have some kind of snide remark about Latter-day Saints calling the Book of Mormon toilet paper, your followers are going to take that into excess and they're going to run with it to places that you never intended it to go. And so this is something that I live by. It's something that anyone that I oversee in ministry is a principle that I try to instill in them. And it's a warning to leaders, but it's also a way to understand what's happening in the world around us, right? It's for me, it's always when I see the crowd shout for I don't know, I would go to myself, okay, where did that come from? I need to find what the leader said that made this kind of explode.
I think it's so insightful because I think so when Driscoll said what he was saying, I think it bothered me in part because and I want to be really clear. I don't blame broader Christianity for what happened. I don't blame Mark Driscoll for what happened. I think
Hmm.
both of those would be unfair. But I kind of made the point after Charlie Kirk was killed. I think there are kind of 3 groups, right? And there are the people who said, "Oh my gosh, I'm heartbroken." There are the people who said, "Oh my gosh, I'm heartbroken. Let's do a little bit of boundary maintenance for clarity's sake." To which my response is, I don't think we need to do that right now, but like let's read the room a little bit. But I don't think you're a bad person. I don't think that you're the one that I want to fight with. And then there's a third group who says, let me performatively say, I'm so sorry, but let me spend all of my emotional energy recapitulating the views of the shooter or the bad people or
Right.
talking about how evil Mormons are. And, Mark Driscoll immediately is publishing a little self-help guide on how not Christian Mormons are, and it's just weird, right? Like it just and I guess with Charlie Kirk, I think this is a useful because it's two different sides, right? Um, when Charlie Kirk was killed, I saw the same three groups. I am so sorry, this is awful. I'm so sorry. By the way, I disagreed with him, but I'm still so sorry. And it's like, yeah, you didn't need to actually add the comma. Like, you're fine. You can just say, I'm so sorry. And then in a week or two, we can go back to, hey, let's talk a little bit more about his life and work and where I agreed and disagreed. And that's fine, actually. That doesn't bother me at all. But then you had the third group of people who were either quietly relishing it or sometimes openly relishing it. And I can't feel like that's a Christian thing to do.
Mhm.
And I think that was a useful way to pitch it to people to say, if you are secretly reiterating all of the things that really vile people have done, that's maybe worth considering and thinking through a little bit more honestly. I wanted to ask you. So I have I really. By the way, everybody should read Kyle's two pieces because they come with great visuals, and they were really nice when I saw them. I was like, yeah, that's what people need right there. One of them was on these three modes. And so I wanted to push for a second and ask, do you think that, and I ask this because I'm the civility guy, and I think somebody needs to ask this, is there a downfall to ambassadorial mode? And I think I have
Yes.
one, but what would you say that is, and why would you say that?
I think with the ambassadorial mode, because of there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs, right? So if you're in polemics, the benefit is you have a lot of clarity, but there's a lot of tension. And then the more the tension builds, the less the opportunity you actually have to speak any longer. People will just shut down. Um, the bridge building mode is on kind of the other end of the spectrum. So the great benefit there is that there's practically no tension at all, but at the same time, the sacrifice is you're not really talking very deeply about the your differences, right? So clarity can um, clarity can be fuzzy. So in that center ambassadorial mode, what you're trying to do is you're trying to strike a balance there. But my concern, because I feel it and I've experienced it myself, is that in a bid to maintain relationships and to be gracious with people, you can almost soften convictions to a point that even as I'm speaking, I feel like I'm muted, as if I'm the one muting myself. Um, and then you kind of have a decision like, okay, I don't think that person understood what I said. Maybe I'm not communicating it well. So if I double click on what I mean, I know I'm going to ratchet up the tension. But if I ratchet up the tension too much, I'm getting into polemics, and then the whole kind of conversation is going to shut down. So it's to me, Martin Luther had this great analogy when he likened it to the twin pitfalls that people often fall into. And I think the specific example he was using was grace and works. But that often with the human mind or the way that we think about things, we're like a drunk man on a horse riding down the road, and it's difficult for us to say atop. And then if we slump over to the left, we'll fall into that ditch, or we slump over to the right, we'll fall into the other ditch. And the only way you're ever going to realize that is when you pull your head up and see the horse walking away from you. And I feel that tension of slipping into the polemics or slipping into the, syncretism in that ambassadorial mode. And it takes wisdom and patience and time to try to figure out how to stay on that horse.
I absolutely love that's such a great analogy for this. I've thought about this a little bit, and the first thought that comes to mind is this ancient Greek word. I tend to find that the virtues and I think this is a C.S. Lewis quote that I'm totally, just absolutely butchering. But he basically said any virtue to excess becomes a vice in its own right,
Hmm.
and you need the balancing virtues. But I'm a big fan of Brandon Sanderson, and there's this really cool idea in his writing where you have gods that are based on virtues. So you'll have a god over, justice. Except it turns out that justice by itself becomes crazy and is not actually a good thing. And so you need something to bring it together. And one of those is you need the other virtues, but you also need this phronesis, which is basically common sense, right? Like the
Mm.
ability to apply all these different virtues in different times in different ways. You also said earlier something that really resonated with me, which is friendship is the best way to facilitate this dialogue. And I think that's partially because Friendship acknowledges that I have to have my convictions and to speak them sometimes. And it also gives me the space to do that, where it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, but we're friends, so we're going to go hard sometimes, but we also recognize that there's almost shock absorbers on the relationship where it's like,
Yes.
now say the thing, because I know you didn't fully say it.
Hmm.
And I want that space, right? Um, in a minute, if we have time, I want to get to. I was thinking about saying this, and it wasn't a very nice thing to say, but there were just so many members of my faith online that were getting really, their knickers were in a twist, man. They were really upset that somebody would call them not Christian. I said, hey, whoa, first of all, calm down, because it doesn't matter theologically. Like, and I don't think it matters to them theologically. Like, nobody cares. Like, it's fine. Like, God will decide and we're going to be okay. But second of all, like, to the extent that you can define the terms, I don't think, not only am I okay with what they are saying, I am eager to have the conversation on theology. Like, I like
Mm.
the boundary maintenance conversation as long as it's not just code for contempt. As long
Mm.
as it's actually, let's talk about where our differences are doctrinally. I think that's rich and it's really fun. If it's just there's a good team and a bad team and they're the bad team, that's where I say, yeah, I'm good. I don't actually need that in my life.
Mm.
Anyway, I'm sorry that wasn't a question.
Yeah.
I'm just ranting. So let me
It
go
was a good
back.
rant.
Let me find my next one. So I wanted to ask. So when we're talking about ambassador mode, I've kind of come up with two because I think civility is kind of permanent ambassador mode, right? And there are two that I think of that are dangers for me. One is we claim that we're doing it out of politeness, but what we're really doing is trying to maintain our own reputation. Because
Mm.
ambassador mode never takes any hits. Ambassador
Hmm.
mode never pays a price, right? Ambassador mode can stay above the fray. But because of that, we're not in the arena. We're not actually punching when we feel like we need to punch. And so if it's selfish ambassador mode, that leaves me with concerns. And I know myself well enough to know, am I actually being polite or am I just being a chicken?
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
good.
tricky one, right? So
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. So effectively, so this is great. I love having this conversation because I think I said in the essay, like, hey, these are raw thoughts of mine. So I might revise these things, but
And
um,
just so we're clear, I wasn't
yes,
pushing you to. I really enjoyed
no,
it.
no, 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 no,
I'm
no,
a nerd
yeah,
that's like, oh, an essay, let's talk about it.
yeah. So what you're hitting on is something I just addressed really briefly. Like, there's in in the pursuit of grace in the ambassadorial mode, there's the conviction, there's the temptation to soften um, distinctives and clarity. So what's the softening agent? And that's not something that I address in the essay. But what you're saying, and I agree, one of the softening agents is cowardice uh, that is fueled by pride, right? Or you're preferring the relationship over getting to actually communicate differences. And I actually think that that might be one of the more weaknesses of like the bridge building type mode. So that's really key insight, and I think you're onto something. Yeah.
It was funny. When I was reading your essay, I was reminded when you're talking about bridge building. I went to Catholic school when I was a kid, and it was a blast. I mean, I learned so much, and I think that's part of my kind of natural, I don't know, ecumenicalism to use a word that's probably needs defining. Let's just say it that way. But I remember I went on a walk with a Catholic buddy of mine a few years later when I'd come home and I lived in Italy for a little while, came home to the States and went on a walk and I was like, so how do you feel about ecumenicalism? He's like, I think it's great as long as it means that everybody should join the Catholic Church. And he laughed out loud and he said, and that's my problem with ecumenicalism. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, there are only two things people mean when they say ecumenical. Well, there's probably a third category, but he didn't include that. He said they either mean just join my church, or they mean we have no differences. Let's all live in a hippie commune. I'm sure nothing will go wrong. And
Yeah.
those two are kind of the extremes. And he's like, nobody who talks about ecumenicalism can take it seriously because it's just a matter of which side you're falling on. And I thought your bridge building piece was really, really nice, where it's like the best civility work is getting into the meaty stuff and saying, but we do disagree. And they are meaningful
Yes.
disagreements. And that's a good, because that's what makes us distinct. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, I
Well,
thought that was,
there's an analogy that I like to give when we approach interfaith dialogue or I'm doing training with students and those types of things. And the analogy is a couple who's dating. And if you imagine a couple who only ever talked about what they disagree on. Like I like, I like this football team. Oh, I think that football team's terrible. Oh, okay. Well, I like Italian food. Like Italian food is just full of carbs and I don't like it. That relationship's going to end by the end of the day. Like you just cannot sustain a relationship if the only thing you're talking about is what makes you different from each other and what you don't like about each other. But at the flip side of it, if all you ever talk about is what you agree on, you're actually going to create a caricature of the person that you're committing to. And then eventually, when the differences do show up, the relationship is going to fracture. So imagine a couple that's only ever talking about what they agree on. Everything's perfect. They can't believe how in sync and how aligned they are on things. They get engaged, they get married, and then 6 months passes and they have their first disagreement, and then another disagreement and another disagreement. They're going to be in my office for marriage counseling, right? That's exactly where that's going to go. So, with that analogy, I think it's appropriate to say, like, if you desire to have these kinds of interfaith dialogues with other people, you have to talk about both of those things, or else you're not actually getting to understand and to know the person across the table. And worse, you're doing them a disservice because you're not you're not sharing who you actually are with them. So
I,
in a sense, you're like creating your own caricature of them to conceive or to see you as.
I'm
Um,
loving this. I'm seeing a new essay like at Kyle Beshears' Substack. It's like why marriage needs polemics occasionally, right?
occasionally,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but I think there's some truth in this, right? I think there's something really meaningful about saying if you are just forced. I mean, I listen to some Jordan Peterson, some other people, and they say this repeatedly. If you never know how to get to the heart of the issue, you're not actually going to be happy in your relationship. And
yeah,
I think that every one of us who has, let me also just say, every one of us who's been in a marriage has experienced that, is what I was going to finish. I need to finish my thought sometimes. Um, oh, shoot, I was going to say something else. And that's what it was. I think saying I love you can become trite. And so one of the things I've tried with my wife is to, if I'm just saying it out of habit, I replace it with something else that is also true and something that I mean. And one that was actually really, really fruitful was, I love being married to you and I'm committed to this relationship. And like, I think
mm-hmm.
sometimes when the reason why there is strain on the conversation is because it might signal, I don't actually want to be connected to you. And when you can say, hey, you're a good enough friend that I feel like I can argue this out with you, that conveys a whole different set of meanings that I think is really, really fun and really joyful. All right. For time, I wanted to ask if we could kind of dive in now to some things across the board. And I want to do the bridge building. I think, let me put it this way. I think a good relationship has a little bridge building and a little ambassadorial mode and a little bit of polemics too. And
Yeah,
I was going to try and see if we could, and I don't know, maybe it'll be a disaster, but we could try and model a little bit of let's do some strong disagreeing for a second.
sure.
Um, my, I want you to respond because I have honest questions, but I also want to give you a chance to ask some too. The first one that came to my mind was I was about to ask this, but I tell me if this is mean. I don't think so. Going back to what you said, there were people that wrote to you and said, "Now we're sacrificing clarity." And the response I would give to them is, no, 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 I am eager for the conversation about theology because I love that conversation. Frankly, I am a member of my faith because I think my faith is awesome and I love what we have to offer. I don't think that's mean. Where it might be mean is if I start listing specific doctrines and being like, I think we're better here and I think we're better here.
Mhm.
But I think doctrinal differences are both core to who we are. It's what matters to us, and I think are really juicy. So let's start with this. What are the doctrines that you love that we miss out on? And then I might try and take a turn on a couple of my own, and take your time if you need to, because I'm just kind of springing that
Yeah.
crap on you real quick. But what are some that you love about your faith that maybe members of my faith could listen to a little bit?
Okay, I think the first one is a doctrine that actually I held to it because I was supposed to for a long time, but it wasn't really until I started getting into Latter-day Saint doctrines that I said to myself, well, why is it that I hold this position? Is it because I'm supposed to, because this is what the historic Christian church has believed, or is it because I actually believe it? And it's Trinitarianism.
Hmm.
And the more that I got into my own tradition's writings on Trinitarianism, and actually branching out from Protestantism and getting into Roman Catholic writings and seeing how the doctrine developed, the more, and this might frustrate Latter-day Saint listeners, the more Trinitarian I became. Because it, to me, is like this the central paradox of the relationship between Christ and God and his spirit to us is how is he both the transcendent, untouchable, unknowable, holy God, and yet he's the immanent one who walked among us, wept when his friend Lazarus died. What's the relationship between the Father and the Son and the Spirit um, in their redemptive activities? Are they all equal? Is there some kind of hierarchy within the Trinity, which is actually a debate that's ongoing right now in evangelicalism? So I found that I became more Trinitarian over the years when I was studying Latter-day Saint conceptions of the Godhead and kind of comparing both of those. So
That's a
was
great
it
example. That's perfect.
well was it is it something I wish you were, or is it something that I think was a just a big difference? I don't
No, no,
remember
no, but I
how you
love
wanted to
that.
phrase it.
So
Okay.
either one is a great answer. In fact, I'll riff on that just for a second.
Yeah.
I am very happy to be a Latter-day Saint. I embrace our doctrine. I think sometimes we give short shrift both to ourselves and to our Christian friends when first of all, one thing that drives me crazy is when Latter-day Saints will create a straw man of other people's beliefs and just kind
Mm,
of mock it instead of understanding it. And I think most of the time when we talk about the Trinity, we engage in that. And it always drives me a little bit crazy. I think that's in part because of my Catholic school upbringing and, recognizing that. And I was in seventh and eighth, or I guess I was in eighth grade when I got there. And I was used to eighth grade arguments about the Trinity, and they were all pretty ridiculous. It was at the level of like, you take a napkin, you fold it in three, it's one napkin in three folds. And I would just roll my eyes. Well, turns out the best theologians can do a little bit better than that. And maybe I should actually do my due diligence before mocking, at a higher level. I'll tell you one that kind of in reverse. I so I'll start with the one that I would love to preach a little bit more, because I think I found some good terminology for it. Brent Schmidt is a colleague up here at BYU Idaho. Love the guy. Oh, and by the way, I'm wearing the jacket that has BYU Idaho on it. This is my podcast. I don't speak for the institution. I feel like I need to say that once a podcast, but Brent Schmidt, it does really good work, and he has written a couple of books on relational faith and relational grace. And his view as an academic is that a lot of these things are covenantal, right? That when you would give a gift in the ancient world, it was always expected that there was some level of reciprocity, right? That the gift is never really free. And he uses that to talk about our doctrine, which is very distinct, and I recognize
mm,
that. And I love that. I actually love it for devotional purposes, though. It's not actually so much as an in your face, you got it wrong, Protestants. It's much more of, it's about building a relationship. And that has been really meaningful in my private worship of like the other one so that's relational grace. But then the other one is relational faith has been really meaningful to me because for a long time I thought faith was just like believing without evidence, and that I'm too much of a
mm,
scientist. That never
mhm,
resonated with me.
mhm,
More recently, I've come to see it as relational faith is just faithfulness to a relationship. It's saying that I want to stay in contact. By the way, if you want the books, he'll send you a free PDF. Don't tell him I told you that.
Okay.
But he's not looking to make money, and he's just the best guy. Just he's the only person I know that every time I give a conference presentation, he'll walk up to me afterwards and be like, the ancient word for that is, and he'll give me a whole paragraph about what I didn't know. It's just really fun. He's just such a cool guy. But the faith piece, I think, has been helpful for me because pushing myself to believe in something I don't have evidence for has never felt good as a scientist. I think I'm too rational in that way. What has felt a lot better to me is living up to what you know to be true, being faithful to your convictions. Um, to put it a different way, faith in Christ, in my view, or in this kind of Brent Schmittian view, is less about I'm going to force myself to believe, and it's more about I'm going to be loyal to Christ until the end. I'm going to live up
Mm.
to the best that I can be, and that has been really, really lovely. Now I have to put a spin on this right at the end. Um, I have been in enough evangelical circles that I can say, and I can say it honestly, that there is a difference between the way we talk about grace in my faith and the way that you all talk about grace. And it's one for which I have real holy envy. And the funny thing to me is like, we don't actually think we have to be all that good, but because we feel like there's a little teeny piece that we have to pay, I think it actually in some ways has worn away our appreciation of what that grace cost and what it means. Um, and I think my evangelical friends get that in a way that we don't always. And
Mm.
that's a space where like I love the new hymns. I don't know if you know about the new hymns that are
Yeah,
coming out in
yeah,
our church.
yeah. Mhm.
And some of them are like we had some old ones that were also borrowed from the broader Christian tradition, but I have loved seeing the new ones because they are so clear on that point of like we absolutely believe we are saved by grace, right? We believe there's covenants involved. Yes, those are real things. But I think the emphasis is subtly shifting, not for PR reasons. And I want to really stress that. I don't think that's why. I think it's because we're getting a little bit more mature in our doctrine. And that says we need to do some things. We do believe that. It's not free and it's not cheap, but it is the kind of thing where, my son walks over to me and he says, Daddy, will you help me clean my room? And he picks up two or three things and I do the rest, right? And keeping it in that context, I think is something that I've picked up from watching my Protestant friends that has been meaningful for me. You said you had a second one. I want to hear what the second one was.
Well, funny enough, it's pretty close to what the conversation went to because it's a doctrine within Protestantism. So if we had a Roman Catholic on the line right now, we might get in a Mexican standoff. But it's justification by faith alone, and so that's really close to doctrines of grace that you're talking about, and doctrines of faith, and how does faith and works, how do those relate in the way we understand it? Drawing on letters like Galatians, Ephesians, and Romans. Those are kind of the three big ones for us that we draw a lot of our understanding of faith and grace from. I'm preaching through the letter of Galatians right now, and there's nothing that helps you understand a biblical text better than having to explain it to hundreds of people and knowing it's going to have a direct impact on their life. And so you take it, hopefully, you take it really, really seriously. I think if I can be frank, one of the least understood doctrines of the Reformation among Latter-day Saints that I found is this one, the doctrine of justification by faith alone. Because what they hear is cheap grace. So I believe the gospel. God says, okay, you're good to go. You can go do whatever you want. You can live however you want, and then you're going to go to heaven when you die. And that's actually not true. That's not what we believe. That's a caricature that admittedly we came up with ourselves. And in fact, the term cheap grace comes from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran theologian and was really critical against Protestants understanding faith that way. My preferred analogy for faith and the relationship of works comes from John Calvin. So you're probably familiar with Calvin of the Calvinism, but he likened faith and works to the sun and the rays of light or the heat that the sun produces. He says, if you can imagine for a moment what the sun is doing is it's burning and it's creating heat and light. It can't do anything but. There's no conceivable reality in which the sun burns and does not produce light, where the sun is constantly on fire and never produces any heat. And he says that's the same thing that especially James, faith without works is dead, is trying to communicate. That faith is like the sun, and our good works are like the light that it produces or the heat. The works that we do don't produce the heat or the sun, right? So the works that we do don't produce faith, but true faith always produces heat. It always produces light, if that makes sense. Which is how we understand faith without works is dead. The reason that I find this to be one of the most precious precious doctrines for me is that it puts me in a place of humility where I recognize there's absolutely nothing I can do that would make God love me any more or any less than He already does, always will, and always has. Right? As Paul talks about from the foundation of the world. Right? Um, in you mentioned relationship, like grace communicated in a relationship. I think that's spot on. Like the New Testament authors are constantly reminding us that God covenants with us so that we can enter into a relationship, and then once we're entered into that relationship, obedience comes. Right. One of the favorite analogies that Paul likes to use is adoption. He uses it a handful of times, and he says just like the way a parent would adopt a child, and then once the child is in the family, they take the name, you do things that family's way now. You don't belong to anybody else, you belong to me. It's the same thing that God's doing to us, and there's not anything that an adopted child needs to do to maintain their adopted status, right? So our family adopted our daughter. And if I was to tell people, hey, my daughter's status as our daughter is predicated on her performance, that's terrible. Like what kind of
There's a list of things you have to do to
you
earn
have
your,
right
yeah, yeah, yeah.
to maintain your status as my daughter. That's terrible. That's terrible. But if I was to say, hey, we adopted our daughter and she can go do whatever she wants. We don't expect anything out of her. We don't hope for anything in her future. We're just going to leave her be and let her do her own thing. Well, that's the cheap grace thing, right? So, yeah, the doctrine of salvation or justification by faith alone for us is the only thing that we have to contribute to our right standing before God is trust. Like we just trust that what he said to Abraham is true. We trust that what Christ has preached and his death, burial, and resurrection is sufficient for our salvation. We just trust that that's true. And in that trust creates that relational space for us to obey. And we know that we really do trust God because what we call sanctification, we begin to become holy and to become like him. So yeah, you mentioned there's a lot of overlap there. And the longer I've talked to Latter-day Saints, I think this is probably one of the biggest misconceptions that we have of you is that, and I hear it all the time, that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches an explicitly works-based salvation. Like there's absolutely no grace to it whatsoever. And if there is grace, they're just paying lip service to it. Um, I think I don't know how you then explain God's maybe you call it mercy in resurrecting all people at least to one degree of glory in the eschaton, right? So it can't be a completely graceless faith. It's just when you want to get down to the nitty-gritty and the granular things and how we understand like what the Apostle Paul is talking about in Galatians as far as our relationship of our faith and works to like our justification or right standing before God, that's where we're going to have some disagreements. But I find that there's a lot of fruitful discussions if you can stick with it.
Yeah, well, 'cause, I mean, soteriology is not for the weak, right? Like this is
No,
this is this
no.
is good, juicy, heavy stuff.
Hmm.
But I also think so. So to your point, I think Latter-day Saints need to understand. I really do think it's better for us when we take seriously what your doctrines actually say. I think that there's something actually really beautiful. In fact, my friend Dan Ellsworth has talked about this in Public Square Magazine a couple of times, I think, where he's talked about there's a difference between doing the things that converted people do and actually being converted. And
Yes.
I think that in our tradition, we sometimes start to worship at the altar of obedience instead of worshiping God through obedience. And that difference is subtle, but it is that they are very diverging paths. Um, and by the way, I did actually know that cheap grace came from Bonhoeffer, so I
Okay.
wasn't total that I may have only learned it a week ago, but I did know that one at least.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
But
good. That's good. The term we have for that, what you're describing is legalism,
yeah,
classically defined. Like
yeah.
that's how we would define it. And for us, legalism is one of the most sinister errors that God's children can make because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It gives false sense of security because it migrates the foundation and the power that sustains the relationship between you and God from God down to you up to God, right? So there's something, like I said, like the relationship with my daughter is predicated on perfect performance, and if she messes up, she's out of the family. That's a, Jesus and Paul say things like, even the Gentiles know how to give good gifts. How much more do you think your Father in heaven knows? So if you know instinctually that it would be immoral for me to, kick my daughter out of our house because she's not living up to our standards, how much more does your Heavenly Father have grace and mercy for you to, as John says, mediate through the atonement of Jesus Christ to keep us in covenant with Him? Yeah.
I loved your metaphor of the sun too, because it's almost a
Oh, it's
quote.
not mine. John Calvin's. I
Oh, no,
stole
no,
it.
no. It's
Copy,
totally
paste.
yours. I'm citing you forever. No, no, no. But I think it's beautiful because in part what it says is when you are converted, it shouldn't be hard to tell, right?
Right.
Like it should
Right.
actually change you. And I think, again, I think that there are some people. I think in some ways, Latter-day Saints, I mean, I work at a university, so maybe this is just the university side, but I think Latter-day Saints are really big on Enlightenment culture, and we love the science, and
Hmm.
we're very much into that. And I have a hypothesis that like Star Trek: The Next Generation was adored by more Latter-day Saints per capita. And I don't know if that's true, but I feel like it was true. There's just a part of us that really likes the science side. Because of that, I think sometimes we don't know how to we know how to do the dance steps, but we can't dance to the music. And that's one that I'm stealing from somebody,
Mm.
where it's like you're doing the things converted people do, but you're still not tasting conversion because you're not willing to let go of some of those other things. And the beauty of conversion to Jesus Christ is that it changes you at its most fundamental, in who you are in your DNA, and you want to be a different creature. When I don't even know what a born again Christian is at this stage. Like I don't know who that is. I feel like that's only somebody that people on the left talk about as a caricature. But in a practical sense, I think Latter-day Saints view it as you have to get baptized and then you have to do this and then you have to do this and then you go to heaven, instead of baptism is the outward emblem of this deep inner conversion where you change and you want to become like Jesus. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that we could probably do better to communicate occasionally. All right, I want to ask the question of questions. This is the big one that we hear all the time, and I want you to feel free to be as polemic as you want to be, but also feel free to I trust you, and I'm not going to be offended. Um, when Mark Driscoll was kind of raging and saying all the things, I think the Holy Spirit came and just said, you should just shut up for a week. Like you don't need to get into this. And that was probably good advice. But what I wanted to do is actually engage him on the question of whether we're Christians, because I think a lot
Mm.
of Latter-day Saints are going, we are. And I don't think that was actually really helpful because that feels misleading to people. Again, it feels like we're missing some of the key differences. How would you answer the question, are Mormons Christian? As succinctly as you can manage, because I know that's a big question, but how would you answer honestly?
Yeah, I think the thing we're asking when we ask, are Mormons Christians, are Latter-day Saints Christians, is do I think they're going to heaven? That's what's really being asked. And I think at the end of the day, that's the card that everybody's holding on to, and we're all pretending like we're not looking at it when we're asking that question. And so I like to short circuit this conversation and say at the outset, there is one judge, there's one mediator between God and man, and it is the man Jesus Christ. And so I will not ever judge anybody's eternal destiny because that's not my place to make that decision. If it was, I would be a very unjust man, and eternity would be filled with injustice. And I am so glad that the one that has that role and responsibility is the man that we see in the Gospels, right? Who is concerned about justice and yet also is extremely gracious and merciful and loving and a servant. So I'll say that if it's not satisfying, I don't know what to say. So
I think
then
that's
I
a really good response, actually. I think that's
okay.
fabulous.
Good. So I'll back up and I'll say, and this is where I think the discomfort comes in. I prefer the question of where does the Latter-day Saint tradition fit in within the broader story of Christianity, and everybody's sitting down, or if you're riding, driving the car and you got kids, you pull over just a second, just so we're all safe here. What I'm going to say is going to sound shocking, but then give me the second part. Is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints um, a faithful bastion of the historic Christian orthodoxy of, you know, the church? No, absolutely not. Is it supposed to be? No, it's not. Otherwise, the first vision doesn't make any sense. There's no need for the Book of Mormon. There's no need for living prophets in the latter days. So while on the one hand, it can feel really intense and unkind to say, Latter Day, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saint is unchristian or not Christian. That's precisely, in some ways, the whole point was to restore what it saw as having succumbed to the great apostasy, right? So my major concerns with Latter-day Saint faith and practice and doctrines ultimately come down to authority. Like who is God and who gets to say so? Is it at the end of the day living prophets in the continuation of revelation from heaven, or is it in the way that I understand it? Hebrews 1, in former days, God spoke to us this way, but in this last days, he spoke to us through Jesus Christ, and then that's it. That's where I think the debate is healthier because what we're talking about is not, do I think you're going to heaven and I'm going to hell or vice versa? It's not even, do the things that you hold precious about your faith matter at all and the things that I do don't and vice versa? It's, hey, these are really, really big and important questions and they distill down to authority. Who is God? Who gets to say so? And that's where we have, I think, an impassable chasm. Because the moment I say, yeah, there are living prophets, then why aren't you Latter-day Saint? And then the moment a Latter-day Saint says, like, no, I do think the creeds from the historic Christian church accurately represent the faith. Well, then why are you still Latter-day Saint? Like,
Yeah,
why aren't you traditional Christian or
that's
creedal
exactly right.
Christian?
So,
So
so
yeah,
I would love to hear. So here's my very quick take, and I would love to hear your pushback on whether this is an appropriate thing to say, and whether this resonates for you. I kind of take the heresy 2025 take of like make Mormonism weird again, right? Like, and I kind
I
of mean this
have
like
no, I
when
have
people
friends
say
that are
like you're a
LDS that
bunch of
are.
heretics, I was like, yeah, no, I know, isn't it awesome? Like we totally are. Like it gets better. Like you don't even know the half of it, right? I think when people say, are Mormons Christian, they're saying one of three things. First, they're asking, and actually, I think it was Pew or Gallup or somebody did one of these, where they basically said, what do you mean by Christian? And the answer was, do you worship Jesus? And on
Mhm.
that basis, I think it's totally fine for us to say, yes, we do. We may conceive of him very differently. And so when people say, well, it's a different Jesus, well, I don't think it is, but fine. I see what you mean. We have very different beliefs about Jesus, but fundamentally, he's core to our worship. So that's number one. Number two, are you a creedal Christian? Are you
Mhm.
a Protestant, basically? Are you, but it's not just Protestants. That's the one tricky thing. Are you Protestant and or Catholic, right? I think is kind of what we're really asking. Are you creedal? Are you Trinitarian? And frankly, I think Latter-day Saints need to be the first ones to go, no, we're not. And we're not trying to act like we are. We're not being
Mhm.
subtle. I don't think we should be rude about it, but like, I'm not offended when people are like, no, they're not Protestant. I'm like, yeah, no, exactly. And we all kind of nod our heads together,
That's
and
the point.
that's fine, right?
Yeah.
There's a third definition that I think is a lot more fun to tease out, though. And I think the third definition is there are two tribes. There's a good guy tribe. There's a bad side tribe. And when I say they're not Christian, what I really mean is you're allowed to have a little bit of, um, you know, ill will towards them because they're on the bad team. And that's the only one where I feel like, and it's really hard. How can you taste resentment? How can you can't really always suss it out. But there
Mhm.
are times when, for example, when the shooter, if somebody says that we have beliefs they disagree with, it doesn't bother me at all. If they say that we're antichrist, I'm probably going to roll my eyes a little bit. I might even say, tell me more about that. That's really interesting. But I'm not really going to care. But then there are times when people go so far as to, like, you can tell that there's just a lot of, quiet inner fury. And it's like, there's good team and there's bad team, and you're on bad team. And I don't think that's actually a theological distinction. I think that's just tribalism. And I think it
Mm,
runs really, really deep. And I think that's the part where I think bridge building is useful, where I think we can talk about that more. I will never forget when Mitt Romney was running for president. And, I have problems with Mitt Romney politically. I don't think he's perfect. But Robert Jeffress, I remember he stands up, he says, I can't tell you who to vote for, but I can tell you that Mitt Romney is no Christian. And I remember feeling when I watched that, he's not making a theological argument. He is doing boundary maintenance on tribes. He's saying there's a good team and a bad team. And that was my immature view. I was in college at the time. I may have just taken offense when it wasn't attended. On the merits, I don't think we are Christian in the sense he was describing. That didn't bother me, but I could feel a little bit of that. Um, uh, I don't know. Resentment isn't the right word, but just contempt, I guess. Maybe there's just
contempt.
almost
Yeah.
like a tribal contempt. And I said, if what people are asking is, do you worship Jesus? I feel very confident saying yes. He's who we care about. He is the core of our faith. We believe we are saved through Jesus. Are you a creedal Christian? No. And we know that, and it would be actually dishonest for us to claim otherwise. Number three, if it's tribal and it's just about contempt, I just don't even want to play the game. I just feel like
Yeah.
that's a really weird. So, having now said that, does that feel off base to you, or is that an okay
No,
conception?
I'd love to like work my way back up from three and then to two and to one because I had some thoughts on that. I like the tribalism insight. I really resonate with that. I think what's interesting is that if for the vast majority of evangelicals are they wouldn't articulate um the they wouldn't articulate their feelings towards Latter-day Saints in the way that Mark Driscoll would, but they wouldn't consider Latter-day Saints part of the tribe, right? So I think what you're hitting at here is really important in the tribalism, and then it bubbles up. Frankly, this is going to sound mean, but evangelicals don't really think about Latter-day Saints very much. Like I'm lucky if I grab an average evangelical and I ask them, "What do you know about Mormonism?" Because they're not going to know what a Latter-day Saint is. So you've got to go back to Mormon and Mormonism. And they're going to say that's the religion where John Smith found the silver plates and they married a bunch of women and went to California. Like actually, I'm like, oh, well, we're doing good. We got some stuff to work with, right?
There were actually some accuracies in that, right? And
Right, right. So that's the y'all are like starting at a serious deficit with us as a people, and there's so many more of us than there are of Latter-day Saints. I think it's why as a tribe Latter-day Saints are keenly aware of how they're being perceived. Your history with us, notwithstanding of violence and rhetoric, I think I said on another podcast recently, if you look at the relationship of Latter-day Saints and evangelicals since the very beginning, the seasons of peace have been the exceptions. The rule has been hostility. So tribalism, I think, is true. The thought I had, and it was kind of raw, and so I don't know if I'll get in trouble. We'll see. If evangelicals really don't believe there's any modicum of Christianity within the LDS Church, and they believe that Latter-day Saints are in the other tribe and they're the other, why then is the posture uh, like what you described with Jeffries, kind of guarded and stay away and don't go near them? When if we really do believe that y'all are not saved, our posture should be go, like treat them with gentleness, treat them with kindness, like um,
they should be the first people we're evangelizing. They should be the people reaching out to and building relationships with.
exactly. And so this is something I genuinely don't understand.
Well,
And it
this is one of my spicy questions that I don't want to be too polemic
okay.
about, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I think that we face a problem in our church of too much hierarchy, right? Where
Mm,
if a bishop somewhere does some awful thing, now the prophet has to take responsibility for it because we have such clear lines. And that can be tricky because it's a big church and there are bad people in it. And I think we're better than average. We do really good work. But you'll see in the news, somebody will be like, oh yeah, those Mormons, they do this. And it's on the basis of one person.
Hmm.
But when an evangelical will do something, people will say, "Well, I'm not even in that denomination, or I'm not in that church. That wasn't that my I'm not the pastor." There's this separation that happens that is in some ways
Hmm.
protecting of reputation. But let me put a little bit more of a finer point on it. Is it because of the fear of competition? Is it because
Oh,
Mormon missionaries knock on the door and it's like,
yes.
I want to inoculate you against they're bad people, just stay away, instead of it's not actually out of concern of getting baptized. It's not a concern about theology. It's not a concern about salvation. It's if I can tell my flock that the Mormons are dangerous, then I am more likely to keep them in my congregation. Is it as simple as that? Is that too cynical?
It's very simple. I think you're onto something. It might be oversimplifying it, but the core of what you're saying, I think, is true because you look at both evangelicalism. By definition, the word evangel or evangelion is part of our title, which is the Greek word for the gospel, right? It's good news to be proclaimed. Classically, evangelicalism has been defined as a people that are into missions. Like evangelicals are one of the largest. We're like a loose matrix of all sorts of different churches and organizations and denominations, but we're also one of the largest, if not the largest, funder of missionary efforts, proselytizing in the world. You have that, and then we meet you, and you pretty much have the same goals in mind, right? And so you have baked into both of our convictions that the other needs to join.
Yeah,
That
and
there's
it's almost a zero sum. If you win a convert, that means I lost somebody, right? Like
correct, correct, yeah. And I would say that I've sensed, how do I say it? I'm a pastor, right? And I do get concerned when people leave the church for reasons that I don't think are very good, right? So if I have somebody that, say, leaves our church for another church, and they give me all the right answers, but in reality, what they're doing is they're running away from relationships that they've broken. That's a really concerning thing to me, and I don't think that's a legitimate reason to leave the church. I think at the heart, as a pastor, the reason I don't want people to leave our faith communities is because I think it's healthy, I think it's godly, and I think they're becoming more Christ-like and they're experiencing the Holy Spirit producing fruit in them. Like, and I don't want you to leave that. So it is genuinely for them. I sense sometimes with Latter-day Saints who are a bit more skeptical of the evangelical movement, all pastors do is sit around all day and try to figure out how to keep people and get more people so we can make more money. And that is not true. I'm not going to tell you how much I make, but it's approximately the same amount as a high school teacher.
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of pastors are either bivocational or if we're blessed to be full time like me, we have to be dual income or you're just kind of squeaking by. And then so the few pastors that are like huge and they have helicopter landing pads in their backyards and stuff like that, like I don't like those guys either. But here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to say they're not in my movement.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to pretend like they don't have any kind of influence even on people that I love and respect and admire. So yeah, that's a bit of a ranty thing, but
No, no, no. I loved it. I think this is a weird idea to Latter-day Saints because our church is so tight, the hierarchy issue, right? Like if
mhm.
if somebody's in Germany but they're a member of our church, they are in our church. When I talk to my LDS friends about this, they sometimes have a hard time grokking that like Joel Osteen is as foreign to most of my Protestant friends as he is to us. Right? Like, and he's
Yes,
getting
yeah.
he's getting mockery from other Christians too. Like, if you see a great meme, it was probably made by a Christian who's mocking Joel Osteen or Mark Driscoll or whoever it is, because there are differences in that way. The other thing I wanted to mention just really quick was I don't know what it is about us that I think we have almost like youngest sibling syndrome, where we like everyone, but we really desperately want to be liked. And I
Mhm.
think there's a certain maturity that comes in, if you like me, that's great, but I'm me and I'm gonna be me. And I don't mind at all when Latter-day Saints are like, hey, just want to clarify, we do believe in Jesus. That's a good clarifier. Or when they say, yeah, we're not creedal Christians. I'm on board with that too. But sometimes it feels like there's a desire to be in the club. And I just think that we need to understand that there aren't many clubs we actually need to be a part of. And the only one that should really matter um, is whether the Lord accepts our efforts. And that's
Hmm.
about it. Well,
This
you had something to say. Go ahead, and then we should wrap up.
Oh, okay. Well, we can wrap up. It was like a historical note. You said that the younger sibling thing. As a historian of the Latter-day Saint tradition and movement, I feel like that's a relatively recent phenomenon. And
Yeah.
it might seem like it's always been that way, but if you go back to the 19th century, I did some research into Protestant um, missionary efforts among Latter-day Saints in Utah during Brigham Young period while they're trying to colonize what would become the the Mormon corridor. And they had a really difficult time making converts. And I think a lot of the reason is because, like, hey, I was Baptist and I left for a reason. Like, I was Methodist and I left for a reason. Or my dad was Presbyterian and they left for a reason. So you've only one or two generations removed. But then I found this really interesting line that I think kind of summarized back then. There's a Baptist missionary that came to a town and was trying to convert Latter-day Saints, and it was this lady who said, like, look, he wasn't mistreated, he wasn't ostracized, he just didn't belong. And it seems like in during Brigham Young's day, there was that kind of like, we're going to do our own thing. You're welcome to be here if you want to, but we don't really care what you have to say. I'm not saying I'm not prescribing that's how we should go back, but what I'm saying is like describing throughout history what you're sensing, I think is a relatively recent phenomena, and I don't know why that is.
Well, I don't know either, and I'll wrap up on this note because this is the one area where I think I don't actually lament that we have differences. I think some of those differences are beautiful, and it's interesting. A friend of mine kind of taught it to me this way. He said, tribes aren't built a person at a time; they're built a norm at a time, right? That it is the
Mm,
norms and the beliefs and the worldviews we have that construct who we are. That was just a really cool insight that I'd never considered before. Um, I do think that there is one, I think some of it might be a desire to be taken seriously by other Christians. Some of it might be PR. I think some of it is that we don't want to be viewed as the weird outsiders because we don't think of ourselves that way. A lot of times I hear, well, you're as Christian as Muslims are. And we go, well, no, but they're not very Muslim, but we really like them. What's wrong with them? Right. And like our impulse is just very different. We don't see them as the other tribe. We see them as like,
mm,
yeah, they're awesome. But they're different from us in important ways, but like they're great. We just kind of default to that. Um, I wanted to end on this thought. I told you I went to Catholic school when I was a kid, and I thought when I first went there that I would be best friends with like the Christians who were closest to me doctrinally, then the Catholics, and then like the Muslims, the Jews, and then finally the atheists. Like if you think about it in that perspective, that's a pretty 13-year-old
sure.
year old way to view it. And I was like, yeah, that'll make sense because there's no other Mormons in Rome, Italy, right? Like we were the only ones. And what ended up happening that I've always thought back on was that the people that I felt the most kinship with were the ones who were most thoughtful and took their faith seriously. So my friend group was a Methodist, a Muslim, a Jew, and an atheist, and a couple of others, right? But that were all trying to figure things out and would instead of making fun of each other, and a bunch of Catholics. I should mention that too. We were at a Catholic school, but it was the people who took their faith seriously that were in my friend group. It was the
Mm,
people who were serious and were willing to be a little bit mocked. I got made fun of for all of the rules that we follow. And then I looked over and I realized that they were also making fun of all of the Catholics that also follow all of those rules. It wasn't Mormon versus Catholic. It was actually good Catholic, good Mormon, good Baptist versus all of the people who don't really, they were making fun of us for being nerdy.
mhm,
And I think that's actually it's a cool thing for me to look back on and go, we flipped the tribes on accident. And that's okay. And maybe that's even a good thing. And so again, when I read your essays, I felt a lot of kinship and saying, I'm sure we don't agree on a lot of things, but this is the kind of person I want to be friends with. This is the kind of person that I want to build some bridges with. Any parting thoughts before we cut it off? And I have 8 really good questions that'll have to wait for another time.
I was going to say, I love this conversation. I love getting to know you, and I really appreciate you reaching out and wanting to do this. And for the listeners, thank you for your time. I know you probably could have listened to better uh, guests on Benjamin's show today than me, but you chose to lend your ear, and so I'm grateful for that, and hope it was a blessing to you. I'd love to continue the conversation.
That'd be
I
great.
think this is fun, and I think what we've modeled, because we don't really know each other super
No,
well. So what we're modeling for folks right now is what does it look like to discuss through differences and get to know each other at the same time to produce a friendship, because then we can get into deeper and deeper and deeper things.
totally agreed.
And yeah.
Actually, before I forget, how can people find you? If I haven't said it 4 times already, I think Kyle Beshears' Substack is one way that they can Google you. Is there anywhere else that you're putting stuff out into the world?
Yeah, if you like, I'm a pretty personable guy. If you can find me on Facebook and you reach out, I'll respond to you. I'm primarily putting things out on my Substack right now. So if you go to Substack and just type in my name, the last name is Beshears, or Be and then Shears like scissors. I'm like one of three Kyle Beshearses in the world. We're a rare model. And then your listeners might be interested to know I have a book coming out in February, for a really popular series in evangelical seminaries, which is our graduate schools, for ministry training, called 40 Questions About Mormonism. So the series is 40 questions about all sorts of things. But my book is 40 Questions About Mormonism. It's at the printer right now. And so I hope that you would find, even though you're going to find things in there that you disagree, this book is kind of a product of that like ambassador mode, of trying to encourage evangelicals to approach Latter-day Saints in a more Christ-like way.
I love that, and I'm eager to buy a copy when it comes out. So I think that'll be great. And hopefully, if you're listening to my YouTubes, you already know where to find me. But if not, Radical Civility, or follow me on Facebook. That's where you get the really fun. That's where I share memes and tell you about funny things my kids have said. Come to think of it, there is one piece of feedback that I don't need, and that is that my editing is terrible and is basically a hatchet job. I'm trying, friends. I promise.